This guy is Irene. He doesn't eat or sleep all day and only knows how to search day and night. Like that, he swung his sword for 37 years until he fell beside his sword. When he woke up again as a noble boy, it turned out that it was just a dream, but everything was so real. I can feel the muscles and everything. Irene has a strong desire. He wants to practice swordplay right away. Hearing this, the butler was immediately shocked and told him that the joke was not funny at all. You must know that Irene has a famous nickname, Lazy Aristocrat. Because when he was young, he was haunted by his mother's death for 15 years, only eating and sleeping without stepping out of his room. But today, when Irene wanted to practice swordplay, everyone was shocked. When he walked to the training hall, he directly chose the great sword, making everyone stunned. Some soldiers even slapped their own faces to confirm that this was not a dream. His weak body was struggling to swing his sword. The soldiers, seeing this scene, all competed to mock Irene for being weak. He probably only lasted 3 minutes before collapsing. Even the butler advised him not to practice this great sword because it was very tiring. Young master should still rest. He still did not give up, even though every time he swung the sword his body felt pain like it was tearing apart his muscles, but he still had a strange feeling of serenity. By repeating the movements in his dream, he could remove all the heavy feelings in his heart. That made Irene unable to stop until the housekeeper stopped him. It turned out that it had already been dark without realizing it, and Irene collapsed without any strength left. That night, he realized that he had been playing stupidly in the morning and his entire body was in pain and screaming. It was so painful that I couldn't sleep, but after 5 minutes I immediately fell asleep, as expected of a lazy saint. A few days later, he practiced sword swinging every day, and also ate more to gain weight and become handsome and have a beautiful body. The fact that he practiced day and night also made everyone pay attention. Even his genius sister, Kiri, ran to advise him. Swordsmanship was not something he could learn, and advised him to give up. But her stepmother stopped her before leaving and did not forget to tell him to take care of his health. That night, Kiri even secretly ran to his room to apologize for what happened that morning. In the letter, she used her magic to create a doll to support him, and her mother also loved him very much. This made Irene realize that she had been too lazy for the past 10 years, like an idiot, to realize everyone's feelings for him. From the next day, he decided to eat with everyone and no longer eat alone like before. Dad, Mom, Kiri, thank you everyone. I've always wanted to say this. Thank you all for always taking care of someone like me who does nothing and just lies around all day. I'm sorry and I love you all. They immediately became happy, and finally, Irene was able to open up. His father realized that he had changed after he started practicing swordplay. He reminded him not to practice too much and to take care of his health. In the following days, Irene followed her father's instructions and swung the sword for 15 days without stopping, terrifying everyone. An old magician has always been here watching him. Looking at him, he felt the steadfast will like a blacksmith forging his own body. Just a 15-year-old boy with such a strong will. He affirmed that Irene was the best genius ever. After hearing from the guard, Irene's sword teacher was actually a drunk. The magician was angry. He couldn't lose someone like Irene. He went directly to find Irene's father and said he was a genius in sword training and also gave him a letter of introduction from Apprentice Chrono, which is a sword school. The best of this continent and only accept real talent. Regardless of race, gender or status, the reputation far surpasses that of the Royal Academy. Getting admission and competing there is not simple either. Dad is also worried about this. After a final night of thinking, Irene decided to join the Chrono Sword Academy. The next day, he left to say goodbye to everyone. His sister Kiri also gave him a necklace hoping that his brother would be safe. They also realized he was the famous lazy aristocrat and began to despise him. Luckily, he had a letter of recommendation from the knight that day and very quickly he passed through the door and entered the admission test. There were already countless people inside the hall. 400 preparatory students were about to start the year's admission test. The instructor immediately recognized that there were a few good people. The most prominent is probably Ilya Lindsay, the second genius of the Lindsay family, all of whom will have to pass an exam to become official students. The teacher led everyone to the big yard and started testing. The first lesson is endurance running. Everyone runs with all their might. The most tragic thing was Irene. He collapsed on the ground, exhausted, but he couldn't give up like the man in that dream. He was no longer the lazy, trashy guy he used to be. But will alone was not enough. Irene's body finally reached its limit and fainted. When he woke up, he was in the recovery room. The results of this running test are also out. Irene ranked last. The next day the teacher gave everyone a practice schedule, but they couldn't use weapons to practice. That night, everyone was working hard at the gym. Ilya was also here. Don't look at her beautiful appearance and underestimate her strength like this, it's too strong. Any young man would be ashamed to see her practicing. After they looked at Irene, they burst out laughing, unable to lift a barbell. Besides, there is also Judith, who won second place in the recent endurance running test. Even though she's just a commoner, with her strength she's not afraid of any nobles. Some guys came to cause trouble and almost got beaten up. At this moment, Ilya, the leader, talked privately with Irene, making the whole crowd stunned and making him an enemy in their eyes. The red-haired girl came over and asked what Ilya had said to him. He couldn't understand why it was just instructions on how to use exercise equipment, but why it was so stressful. They even suspected that Irene had a special relationship with Ilya from before. Next, the blue-haired noble also came to ask about it and asked him to tell him the story he had just told Judith. Just like that, a month passed and everyone's physical exercise craziness also increased significantly. The only person Ilya especially cares about is the lazy saint Irene. She often shows him basic gym training techniques. Ilya also suspects that he cheated to get here. Just like that, 3 months have passed. Everyone is practicing hard in their own way. They also realize that the lazy nobleman Irene was not like the rumors said, his hard work and efforts were unmatched by anyone. Their midterm exam has also arrived. Everyone must complete the route before the allotted time, including running and swimming. The 5 best preparatory students will be awarded special awards. Blurk and Judith both kept practicing, but after seeing Irene, they had to try even harder, because they felt such a terrible will to work hard from a weak person. But Irene also felt it. The people who mocked and ignored him began to become cautious with him. He also didn't know why Ilya helped him. She doesn't look like a very friendly person. The next day the midterm exam also started. In the first phase of weightlifting, Ilya completed it the fastest. Irene finished right after her, shocking everyone. Why is that lazy noble so strong? Then laughed that he would soon faint if he kept going crazy like that. However, it is only a motivation for Irene to move forward. He felt like his body was burning hot, but it didn't look like he was tired. On the contrary, the speed was getting faster and faster. While everyone had not yet completed phase 1, he had already passed phase 2 of the test, like a monster. Phase 3 was long-distance running. Irene ran right behind Ilya. He had a strong feeling of wanting to conquer her. The speed immediately increased, but Ilya was not easy to beat. She also began to speed up. The two suddenly had to pause when Judith passed them at super speed. As a commoner, she had to put in a lot of effort to get here, so she would never give up, temporarily rising to the top position. Stage 4 was swimming, but Judith was exhausted and Ilya overcame her. She could no longer continue, her body gradually sank to the bottom of the lake. Luckily, Irene saved her. Then he continued to complete his exam. The final result was that although she helped save lives, Irene was ranked 34th out of 35 candidates. Although Blurk succeeded in reaching the top 2, he also began to realize that he had lost to Irene. If Irene had not saved the top 2 person, Judith, he would definitely not have had a spot. If Judith hadn't drowned, his rank would have been only 4. The next day Ilya looked for Irene to ask why he saved Judith's life when he knew that the teacher would definitely save her. Not only that, she was also one of the people who belittled and ridiculed him all this time. Irene also said that there was no need for a reason to save people because his nature was like that. In the end, she immediately left and got angry and did not help him practice anymore. This made him confused and asked why she helped him before. Ilya replied that she didn't know, probably because she hated people who talked bad about others without knowing anything about them. The next day, the midterm exam results also had 35 candidates passing the evaluation round. First and 78 candidates passed the second round of evaluation. The number of successful candidates is 113 people. The top 5 reserve students from the first round of evaluation will receive rewards after a private meeting with the sword master. Irene was also called to the podium. The old sword master praised him for sacrificing himself in a situation where he could have fallen into the abyss. And because of that he was able to save his friend who was drowning. His actions are worthy of praise and worthy of receiving rewards like the top 5. They were all given a request for advice or wanted him to teach swordsmanship, but Irene asked the master how to reconcile with a friend. This also puzzled him. It turns out that Irene wants to reconcile with Ilya but doesn't know how. Finally, the sword master also gave some useful advice, asking if Irene wanted to ask about swordsmanship, but Irene didn't know what to ask, leaving the sword master at a dead end. When Irene left, The sword master felt that even though the boy didn't know anything about swordsmanship, he wasn't worried or afraid at all, as if he was being helped by someone. That afternoon, Judith found Irene to thank her for that day, and also suggested that from today on, the two of them could gather together and eat together, then give him a painful punch so he can't refuse. A few days later their first sword training session had begun. Everyone would be free to use swords for the next 2 hours, choosing a wooden sword as a support tool. Even though it was just a wooden sword, it was very different from before because their bodies had gotten a lot stronger after hard training. Right now, Irene chose a great sword, shocking everyone. Although it's a bit sketchy, it's almost up to the standard of swinging a sword. Blurg saw this scene and wanted to challenge Irene to a match. Everyone didn't understand what was going on. Irene was the same, but after seeing the sword master nod, he also agreed to this. He will be their match referee. The match started. Blurg immediately rushed to attack with super fast speed, but his swords were blocked by Irene. Just like that, one person attacks, one person defends. Blurg also realized that Irene's reaction speed wasn't too bad, but he couldn't keep his balance when using the sword. Furthermore, posture and movement are also very poor. On the contrary, Irene's strength is very great, but that is not enough for him to defeat Blurg. Blurg is the winner of this competition. Then the teacher based on each person's swordsmanship test score to place them into classes of different levels. Class A is the top. The weaker ones will be placed in lower classes B and C respectively. Irene will be alone in Class F. Judith was very angry about this. If given a certain chance she would give Blurg a beating to get revenge. For Irene, the next day the Class F teacher also started teaching him basic swordsmanship. At that time he only knew how to slash horizontally and vertically. The teacher also told him that just practicing hard is not enough to compare with the top people, but also needs talent. If Irene can master basic swordsmanship within a week, he will let him move up to Class C. If he fails, he will continue to be in Class F before leaving. The teacher did not forget to remind him that if he did not have talent, then I think it would be best for him to leave the academy. After 6 days of hard practice, the teacher was surprised with Irene's progress and recognized his talent in swordsmanship. After the test on Saturday, he was finally successfully promoted to Class C. However, his relationship with Ilya was still distant as before. She was the top of Class A in terms of talent and family. No one has enough confidence to talk to her. Judith also helped him practice. Her swordsmanship and strength were very good. If he really fought, he wouldn't be able to last long. Although actual combat made him progress very quickly, in the end he was still defeated miserably. Irene the next day went to give Ilya a gift to make peace. He brought a letter and a gift just like his sister Kiri reconciled with him. Because he used to eat and sleep all day long, that was the only way to make peace that he knew, but Ilya was very cold. "Do you think I'll help you again thanks to these things?" He could only apologize to her and leave. Despite his indifferent attitude, Ilya read it attentively that evening. Irene's gift was a bracelet, which made her face look very unsightly. "Is this Irene asking to marry me?" The next day while Irene was preparing to practice with Judith, Blurg suddenly rushed up, saying he wanted to train him because Irene had a terrible concentration, something he couldn't do. In return Blurg will teach Irene how to use a sword. "I would be happy if the two of us become a group for a short period of time and both grow together." This shocked everyone because Blurg was not a kind person. Irene agreed to this. Blurg also tried training like him, but their differences remained unchanged. He gradually realized that each person had the same amount of practice time, but the density of time spent was completely different. From the beginning until the end of the practice session, Irene never once lost her concentration. He wanted to know how Irene did that. Before leaving, he did not forget to remind Irene not to underestimate herself. "You are truly a genius, your status as a noble is too high, there is nothing to discuss here." That afternoon, Blurg taught him how to use the sword, helping him quickly improve. After receiving the gift, Ilya no longer ignored him like before. That night Irene dreamed of that man again, but the feeling of holding the sword was completely terrifying and real. It was as if he were that person. Because she didn't want to lose the feeling of swinging her sword just now, Irene swung her sword all night. A while later, he was so tired that he fell asleep, but this guy kept waking up and swinging his sword a few times before going back to sleep. Blurg also asked him curiously about this. Irene was practicing her ability to concentrate. Blurg thought he was doing a special exercise, then did the same as him but failed, resulting in a deep sleep. Irene was quickly promoted to Class B with the help of Judith and Blurg. Irene has made great progress, and Blurg has also invited everyone to practice meditation. A few days later he was even able to defeat Judith, driving her crazy. That was the result of his meditation. The next goal is to defeat the top one, Ilya. The next day, the old sword master called everyone to come. Everyone who came here has already won. During practice, everyone endured rigorous evaluations and grueling training. One of the people here has improved a lot more than before. Next will be the final assessment. Unlike the midterm, we will not evaluate based on skills at a fixed time point. It will be an assessment of each person's potential ability. The games just need to prove how capable you are and what you're best at in swordsmanship. For example, a special skill or something like that. After all, the sword master wanted to show them his swordsmanship. Sharp sword moves are performed as gently as the wind but also carry terrible power. Hopefully they can realize something useful with their swordsmanship. Blurg and Judith also want to rush to the top position, but this is impossible. The Lindsay family is considered one of the best of the clans when it comes to swordsmanship, and Ilya studies swordsmanship. However, Judith is rejected. What's so great about that family? Ilya's older brother, who was considered the best genius in the entire continent, was defeated by an ordinary guy who was orphaned at a young age and now doesn't dare to face anyone. Ilya accidentally heard the story and she immediately became angry. It wouldn't matter if you cursed me or looked down on my family. Even if you all talk bad about me behind my back, it won't affect me at all. I will still be the head of this academy. At the same time, Irene is still practicing meditation to concentrate, but it's effective. He immediately thought about meditating while swinging his sword, but it still didn't work. It seemed like he was stuck. With only 15 days left until the final exam, Judith also told Irene that she was an orphan and had to steal things on the street to survive. To get here, she had to put in a lot of effort and also changed a lot after nearly a year here. Irene also realized that he was no longer known as a lazy noble. He's truly grateful for everything. Judith, Blurg, and Ilya, sword masters and instructors, it's time to show them all he's learned. Irene picked up her sword and was more focused than ever. 2 weeks later the final exam began. Everyone showed off their special swordsmanship abilities. Each person had their own swordsmanship, and soon it was Judith's turn. She asked to be tested through a match with Blurg. That way she could also reveal the advantages of both, so in the end she won the sword. The swordsman accepted. The two immediately rushed into battle. Their strength was so terrible, everyone was shocked and admitted that they were inferior to the two of them. Judith is also more aggressive than usual and determined to win. Both of them were great at showing off their swordsmanship skills. Very quickly the battle had results. After a counterattack, Judith's sword was broken and Blurg was the one who won this battle. They had been praised a lot by the sword master. The next turn was Ilya. She would use the family sword that cut down the demon dragon king that year. Her sword moved. Her enormous power blew away all the thoughts of the people who dared to compete for her top position. Even the teachers were shocked. They did not expect Ilya to be so strong. Blurg realized that his level compared to Ilya was a great wall that could not be broken. The last person to check was Irene with her vertical cutting ability, which made everyone panic. Some people even mocked him as a crazy person for doing such basic things in such an important competition. That is also the mood of everyone here. They all didn't understand what the hell Irene was thinking. Irene immediately entered a state of meditation, focusing her breathing into her subconscious. He saw the man swinging the sword in that dream. They all swung the sword so they could become strong with their tenacity of will. At this moment, Irene's terrifying vertical slash was released, causing the arena to split in half, making everyone stunned, as was the teacher. After a while, the results finally came out. The sword master announced everyone's rankings one by one. Judith ranked 4th, Blurg ranked 3rd, Irene ranked 2nd and Ilya ranked 1st. Ilya went to see Irene after the test, wanting to ask about his terrible sword attack just now. This makes Ilya feel that Irene is very interesting. She also said she would not stay here to become an official student. Ilya plans to win first place in the midterm and final assessments, then return to his family immediately. Then she told about her older brothers who were worthy of being the strongest geniuses on the continent. When I turned 6 years old, in the entire continent, no one knew my brother's name. My brother became famous after his battles with the knights. With his superb talent, he has reached heights that others his age cannot reach. He was recognized by many famous figures and quickly became known as the #1 talent. He won the top position at Chrono Sword Academy, but he refused to become an official student. And then the continent's second genius formed a mercenary group at the age of 14. That person was Innate. She asked for fight with my brother. As a result, after 3 attacks, my brother lost. The image of her brother in front of her collapsed, everyone's eyes were aimed at him. In the end, He couldn't get up anymore. He locked himself in his room even though his sister couldn't see him. From then on, Ilya decided to become the strongest person to defeat Ignat for her brother, but this made her tired of always having to chase someone. From now on, Ilya will choose her own path. At the same time, Blurg was also standing in front of Irene's terrible sword. He decided to give up because he could not accept that someone who was just new could be that strong. No matter how many years he had practiced swordplay, he could not reach this strength. Hearing that, Judith immediately punched Blurg and shouted at him, "You should be proud of what you have done. Don't run away from fear, use all your strength to punch and tear it straight." The next day, the old sword master had an interview with everyone. He directly asked Irene why he swung the sword. He also realized that Irene did not voluntarily step onto the path of swordsmanship. "For someone as skilled in swordsmanship as you, I can't feel any emotions. When other people improve their skills, they are happier than anyone else." Judith is very afraid of being overtaken by Blurg and blindly shows all her anger on the outside. Every sword student experiences sadness and happiness during sword training, but Irene has never had any feelings of imitating someone. Irene also admitted this. Then the old sword master directly said that if he had no reason to swing his sword, then he didn't need to be here anymore. The old sword master asked Irene to bring a drop of his blood to confirm the student's official membership, but next year, Irene will have a year to find her own swordsmanship ideal. Irene also said goodbye to Ilya. Before returning to her clan, she gave him the badge of the clan that had it. He could also come to her at any time. Judith also wondered what kind of badge was so sparkling. "Let me see." After being interrogated, Ilya also had to give one to Judith and apologize for her previous words. Blurg also left the academy, wanting to become stronger so he could meet them again. Irene also thanked him. "Every time I swing my sword I feel like I'm alive, which is hard to explain. But a year ago something inside me changed. I practiced swordsmanship because of that and eventually I came to this academy. But the reason I can truly look back, learn from myself, and move forward is because I met you. Why does it sound so sweet?" Irene shouted, "Blurg, please become strong next time we meet." Even though he said that, he felt like he would never see him again. The housekeeper also came to welcome Irene back home. In the end, only Judith remained here. Suddenly Blurg turned around and it turned out that Irene's words just now had made him regain the confidence to face his own swordsmanship. Judith scolded him, but he knew she was also happy about his return. At least she was no longer lonely. In Irene's carriage, the butler thought he was sad because he was not accepted as an official student at the academy. So he took him to the orc seer to see his destiny. However, the orc was stupid when he saw Irene and asked his age, then did not believe that Irene was only 16 years old and affirmed that if Irene followed his swordsmanship, he would definitely become a great swordsman. This made the old butler call orc just a fortune fake. Before leaving, he also gave Irene a note telling her that if things don't go his way, please open this, it will help you. Following the direction he left, Orc immediately thought that he was not very strong but his body movements were very skillful. Furthermore, a powerful source of energy is growing inside Irene. Is it true that at the age of 16 you have such power? Who would believe that? Meanwhile, Irene saw what was inside the small piece of paper that said standing alone does not mean being lonely, which made it difficult for him to understand. Irene also told the housekeeper that he had actually passed, it was just that it wasn't time to officially enroll. The Garayun family's carriage is also coming this way. They have always been confronting his family. They always discriminated against and ridiculed him because out of politeness, they both had to get off their horses to greet each other. They also didn't expect the lazy noble's appearance to be so magical, it looked unbelievable. He started making fun of Irene's studies again, saying he would definitely be kicked out of the academy, but Irene ignored him. This made him very angry. Before leaving, he even wanted to shake hands with Irene to test each other's strength. But when they shook hands, he couldn't do anything to Irene. When Irene used a little force, he cried out as if he had been killed, but he still tried to act unharmed. Suddenly a cat appeared here and could speak human language. "Why don't you punch that guy in the mouth?" That cat is an arcane master, people who can perform miracles. They decided to leave because arcane masters are difficult to mess with. "Sorry for the rude actions just now, we would like to leave. If the arcane master is still dissatisfied, please visit our country." The little cat even stood on two legs and took out his tiny bag, from inside brought out a mini sword and began bragging about his great swordsmanship, making everyone unable to believe it. After half a month of being on the road, Irene finally returned home. He told the story of the cat to his father and found out that it was a mysterious magician named Ruru, a cat but as smart as a human, and above all, it was stronger than any mysterious magician in this capital. 10 days ago, Ruru came to visit and offered to be Kiri's master. We went to the Mysteries Association to find out the cat's identity but couldn't. Kiri immediately asked him for his opinion on this matter. Irene didn't know anything about arcane masters, and he didn't understand why Kiri was angry with him. Irene had to quickly take out a gift for her sister to stop being angry. This is thanks to the butler Marcus's reminder before. At this moment, the goofy cat appeared here again without realizing it, which made Kiri angry and grabbed it and lifted it up. The cat wanted to come here to persuade Kiri, using Irene to make her fall in love with him and become his disciple. The direct result was that the girl got angry and ran away and had to run after her to comfort her. Irene also told everything about her time at Chrono's Sword Academy, and of course he did not forget to give gifts to his parents. Just a gift makes them look so happy. I think they were even more touched than the fact that I was accepted into the academy. For normal families, it seems like nothing. Seeing them happy for such a small thing makes me both happy and heartbroken. I cannot delay finding the ideal of swordsmanship. On the opposing side of the Perreira family, Viscount Phil realized that his youngest son had another problem due to being beaten by Irene, which made him mad. He has always been jealous of Irene's father, his beautiful, dignified wife, and a daughter who knows secret magic. The country that Irene's father governed gradually became more prosperous. Old Phil wanted to deal with Irene so that he would not have a chance to turn around. Mr. Phil's eldest son, named Ryan, took over this matter. When the heads of 6 famous families in the south of the kingdom were present in our territory and would trample on this useless young man, down into the mire again. Ryan is famous for being a very intelligent and dangerous man. The next day, the soldiers were very alarmed when they saw Irene waking up earlier to practice than them, having just returned from a long journey. They spread rumors about Irene failing out of Chrono's Sword Academy, which is why he's here. However, when they tried to lift Irene's dumbbell, the soldiers couldn't lift it. Even Knight Orin was shocked to see the young master's muscular body. He was no longer as skinny as before. Still wearing weights to get on the beam. I don't know how hard the young master has been training for a year at the academy. Orin was confident he could do the same but was shocked when Irene is hanging horizontally on the exercise bar. Irene also noticed Ruru sitting above. She must have come here to persuade him to help her say some nice words to her sister. However, he didn't care because he needed to find his sword and couldn't keep swinging it like that man. A week later everyone practiced with Irene regularly and they also realized that he was so strong that they couldn't seem to keep up. In addition, his diligence also impressed everyone, but Irene felt that this was still not good because they were persistently studying swordsmanship at Chrono's Swordsmanship Academy. As for me, I practice without anyone to support me, so I will have to try harder. And the fat cat Ruru has been watching me practice for more than a week. I don't know what it's thinking in his head. The soldiers also carefully reminded him that the cat was rumored to bring misfortune to those around him like a curse. It turned out that this was the reason this cat was shunned by everyone. He was also curious and asked Ruru if she wanted to convince him, but the cat didn't say anything, instead just watching him practice. The cat's face was boastful again. Teasing Kiri was really fun, but to Irene, it wasn't interested, looking at him as boring as rocks lying in faraway valleys. The cat gave Irene a gift and it could be called the bribe. Ruru brought out a precious stone that shocked the butler because it could buy 1/4 of the Perreira family's territory in exchange for him having to say some nice words praising it in front of Kiri. As long as you can convince Kiri, I will give you more precious things. Irene is also curious why you want to accept my sister as a student. Even willing to give me those precious items. Simply because the cat liked her and he then began to brag about his treasures. This wooden ball has a really pleasant scent and I can't find this scent anywhere, and this is the fox's tail containing memories from before I learned the secret technique. And this is the doll I got from another stray cat. Those were treasures that money couldn't buy, both of them could only be dumbfounded. This cat was so crazy. Irene directly refused to accept Ruru's bribe and instead he would tell his sister his true feelings about the cat. The next day Ruru suddenly told him there was something more urgent and panicked. It turned out that the cat asked Irene to sit and watch it eat because it felt worried when no one was around while eating. The next day, Ruru looked panicked again, calling Irene that something was wrong. This time, it loved a female cat nearby but was afraid to talk to her. It also asked him if he knew what that cat was thinking. While he himself is a super powerful secret magician who can read other people's thoughts, his face started to look confused again. How could a cat like me read another cat's thoughts? This made him laugh like a clown, actually. While talking happily, suddenly Irene stood up and went to practice. I don't have much time to do these things. I need to find out why I learned swordsmanship as soon as possible. In the rain he swung his sword when he didn't know what to do. Ruru now saw the image of that man in Irene's body and then ran directly to want to accept Irene as his student. It released a terrible pressure that was completely different from usual. Its face also started clowning. I will tell you all about it. Come with me to the exciting world of magic, but was rejected by Irene because he is a swordsman, not a magician. Ruru slowly explained to him. He didn't know anything. From the beginning there was no one more suitable for a witch than a strong-willed swordsman. From there, can you find out who influenced your sword and know the differences between swordsmen, magicians and witches? All martial arts masters including swordsmen focus on their own body, i.e. the inner universe. In the process of constant training, they learn the endless mystical power that is aura, whereas magicians focused on their external environment, that is, the outer universe. They analyze the mystical power called mana and endeavor to perceive the principles and laws of the world. As for witches, people often say they are evil people in this world. Breaking all the rules to fulfill their wishes is an unusual creature. Can make all their wishes come true. They have such a strong will that they can change the world on their own. An extraordinary and unique intelligence that an ordinary person cannot imagine. In other words, the witch's power is proportional to the power of her will. In short, if I give you a helping hand, you will be able to awaken the magic within you. It is also very useful for your swordsmanship. But it was still flatly rejected by Irene. The sword is not my sword. Irene also told Ruru about her mysterious dream. It was like a reincarnation phenomenon. In the end, it told him directly that what he had done until now was not an honest effort, but to be honest, it was just a useless effort, which made him incomprehensible. The next day the butler came to tell Irene about the battle that was about to take place in a few days. The meeting about the Southern Union battle will take place at the family home. The head of the house will talk to the young master. So it would be better if you mentally prepare in advance. In addition, there were some bad rumors about Ruru the cat after it joined the Oracle Magician Guild in the Eastern Continent. There are rumors that the guild broke up shortly after it left. They said that the second son of the Jackal territory died by an unfortunate accident. The Gum sect leader of Sangbelbani, who used to be a merchant, said that right after bringing a cat back, it was impossible to escape the collapse. Finally, he advised him to be careful. But all their conversation was heard by the cat, who was sleeping under the bed, and said that it was not the murderer who did those things. He explained at that time that he just happened to pass by there and was considered unlucky. Irene also understands the feeling of having bad rumors directed at her. The lazy noble is no longer the same, and Ruru will one day prove that he is not an unlucky cat even though his fur is black. Because he was touched by his words, Ruru decided to give him a gift of a large gem. This is very expensive. This is even better than the last.
And remind him that, if you've received this, tell everyone I'm not the bad guy. This is a bribe, after all, haha. That evening, he went to meet his father to decide to join the battle with the monster this time. Even though it was very dangerous, nothing could stop him. A week later, they attended the gathering of the clans, preparing for the battle, and both met the nobleman Phil again. Before coming here, the steward had warned Irene to be careful with the other clans. Most of them had no goodwill towards the Perreira clan. As the host, his father began to express gratitude to everyone for dedicating their precious time to ensure the safety of the South's dealings. For the prosperity and peace of the southern clans, for the peace that was in short supply. This was the first time Irene had attended such grand parties, and his way of holding a wine glass made everyone laugh, especially the old nobleman Phil. He emphasized that nobles must have the bearing of nobles, not like Irene, and they wanted to make him the laughingstock for everyone. In the end, Irene chose to run away, even though he had completely changed compared to before, but he had no idea. Over the past period, his father and family had endured so much pain, humiliation when they mocked him and their entire clan. He went crazy waving his sword to vent his anger. Those wretches still hadn't given up. Seeing him brandish his sword, they started provoking and challenging him again. Okay, if they liked it, let's fight. One of them confidently rushed to fight Irene, still looking down on him, thinking that he had only been learning the sword for a year and couldn't do anything. He hadn't finished speaking, and he had already been miserably defeated, and almost killed. Irene turned to the remaining guys and taunted the next person. Martin had to step in directly. The battle had just begun, and he continuously attacked Irene, forcing him to only defend, but looking at Irene's face, there was no sign of weakness. When Irene counterattacked, the weight of his sword made Martin unable to hold it, and he still didn't admit defeat, even though he was about to be killed by Irene. The eldest son of nobleman Phil rushed to fight Irene with a real sword. Of course, Irene immediately agreed. This guy even started to say that he could defeat Irene in the blink of an eye because he was a senior in swordsmanship, so he would let Irene strike first. He even used words to anger Irene, but when Irene held the sword, he became unusually focused, only listening to the words like a dog barking in his ear. Irene started to release a terrifying aura, making the guy instinctively scared and backing away. He realized that he was afraid of Irene's swordsmanship, but even if Irene was just making idle talk, it was enough to shatter his sword. The noble guests had arrived, and he began to pretend to remain calm even though he had lost the battle. He had to maintain his dignity. Irene's swordsmanship was astonishingly powerful. A distance of about 5 meters separated them, and this guy's sword was now split in two. This left them the noble guests incredulous, but they had to continue acting as if everything was normal. Indeed, they were cunning foxes. However, the nobleman, Phil, was furious because his son had lost the battle. He immediately returned to his clan to devise a plan to harm Irene. This time, Irene decided to personally participate in the battlefield. He couldn't push the difficulties onto others anymore. However, when he swung his sword, Ruru just called it a futile effort. Irene decided to learn magic from Ruru to become stronger. But Ruru said that today was not the day for that, they would start tomorrow. The next day, Ruru's attire resembled that of a professor but also looked quite funny. Did he resemble a cat pet? The first lesson was about belief. Depending on how much you believed in it, the power of magic would become stronger. Primitive people worshipped massive stones and the sun as gods, trying to fulfill their desires through rituals. Belief was the most steadfast aspect of faith. Sacrificing lives would mostly fall into the hands of demons. In conclusion, Irene was suited for swordsmanship filled with intense desires. Ruru gave him a task today, to swing the sword 1,000 times with all his heart. Repeating actions related to desires would strengthen the trust and power of the heart. Unlike before, it contained an incredibly deep heart. By the 10th lesson, Irene was exhausted and began to doubt himself. Ruru showed up and said, "The mind is not always consistent." When his initial willpower started to fade, his body became heavier, and dark thoughts clouded his mind. In such moments, most thoughts tended to be negative, so it was better not to go through it alone and better do it with someone else. If you couldn't trust yourself, find someone who did, and when that person faced difficulties, repay the trust you received. Irene was taken aback by this. Who would trust him? But Ruru reassured him that things had changed, and many people now trusted him. He should have confidence. Irene continued to ponder this, realizing he needed to find someone who believed in him. Kairi suddenly sensed a strong presence in his brother's room and rushed there. Irene was inside the opal gemstone that Ruru had given him the other day. She angrily asked Ruru about this, and it had to confess that he needed to enter his mind to grant his wish. Irene would continue training inside it, continuing until he achieved satisfactory results. It was uncertain when he would achieve them, perhaps tomorrow, a month later, or even a year. Irene had now entered his dream, seeing the man wielding a sword, then he suddenly stopped and stared intensely at Irene. Then, a blinding light flashed, and the man disappeared, leaving Irene with a large sword. This was the manifestation of magic. This place was created for his desires, the perfect place for his training, where he could find his own sword for sure. After a tiring day, Irene wished for tomorrow to come soon so he could continue. Surprisingly, the sun immediately rose, and spring arrived, making him even happier. Irene could do anything in this world. He changed into new clothes, enjoyed a delicious meal, and took a rest before preparing for training. On the 5th day here, Irene realized that even if he slept and woke up, he couldn't leave this place. He could only leave when he found his own sword and the man from his dream before. What was the connection between them and his newfound awareness of magic? Irene couldn't understand, so he focused on his swordsmanship. He had swung the sword 2,000 times yesterday, and today, he needed to reach 3,000. But on the 211th day, he noticed that despite his efforts, he couldn't increase the number of swings. What was happening? Perhaps he had grown too accustomed to the environment, so he decided to rest a bit to prepare for the next day. Time continued to pass, reaching the 417th day, and Irene's sword swings continued to decrease, making it impossible to continue his training for the next day. On the 624th day, he no longer held a sword and simply lay on the bed, much like he did when he was a child. Irene began to doubt whether this was all a given. Even the appearance of the sword he held at the academy seemed to belong to someone else. Irene had failed to find his own sword, and his rigorous training in swinging the sword seemed meaningless now. He didn't even know how long he had been here. If time passed here just like in the real world, wasn't he wasting a lot of time right now? Everything had become unimportant, and a sense of laziness had taken over. Suddenly, Irene heard a familiar voice. It was the beautiful Ilya calling him to wake up and train with her. They ran together on a path that had never appeared before, returned home, and enjoyed a delicious meal together. Irene was curious how Ilya could be inside here, but before he could ask, she scolded him playfully. Irene was then coached by Ilya due to his sloppy swordsmanship, and by the end of the day, she disappeared, so Irene realized she was not real, but it still brought joy to him. Irene hadn't even had a chance to rest when Judith dragged him outside for training, and in addition to that, Blurg and Ilya appeared, and they were still arguing like cats and dogs, just as they did before. Everyone here believed in him, and he realized how weak and lazy he used to be in the face of their unconditional trust. Those who had believed in him so deeply. When Irene's tired body couldn't continue running, he wondered why he kept going. It was because he had teammates by his side. Speed and stability gradually returned as he trained with everyone. Now, he was no longer alone. Many people trusted him, just like the prophecy in the orc's paper said, "Believe in yourself and stay with those who love you, and you can overcome anything." In the end, Irene swung the sword a total of 10,000 times, and he succeeded. His friends began to disappear as they had completed their mission. Time passed until the day 1755. Irene had matured significantly. Now, he felt confident enough to confront his 3 teammates. Irene's speed, strength, and reaction abilities were all astounding. Despite being outnumbered 3-1, he held his ground and even managed to learn their swordsmanship. However, he still couldn't master some memories from his time at the academy. In the days that followed, Irene received guidance in swordsmanship from his former teammates and used it to defeat them. When he went to sleep again, he saw a large gate in front of him. Beside it was the sword of the man from his dream, seemingly the key to escape. Irene was filled with confidence because he had truly changed after encountering the man in his dream. He had always imitated to become like him, but that was not it. He would have to wield the sword with his own dedication for that sword to truly belong to him. Bang! With a resounding crash, Irene broke through the gate. A loud bang, and the door burst open. Irene woke up in his bedroom. The room remained unchanged. It seemed that not much time had passed, and he needed to go and meet his parents. The butler saw Irene and rushed over, crying. Finally, the young master had returned. It turned out that he had been asleep for 5 years, and Irene couldn't believe that the time in that place was so similar to the real world. His parents were safe, and they were overjoyed that Irene had awakened. His younger sister Kirill was in the Caesar kingdom, and she had become the disciple of Skinna, a very talented sorcerer. Although his parents said everything was fine, Irene could sense their concerns. The days and months he spent stuck in that distant place must have been very difficult for his parents. But over the past 5 years, I've learned a lot, and I've trained harder than anyone else. Now it's April, and I'm going to participate in the next continuous battle, he reassured his parents. Kirill, at this point, has returned to prevent Irene from participating in the continuous battle because she would replace him in the fight. He had been trapped for 5 years, and Kirill wondered if their father wanted to put him in danger. "Fight me to see if you're worthy," Kirill said to Irene. Of course, Irene agreed, and both of them were ready. However, instead of seeing Irene holding a sword, Kirill saw him grasp nothingness. Suddenly, a sword appeared in his hand, leaving everyone astonished. Irene had truly awakened his magic. Kirill also manifested 3 magical swords and attacked him. He could only defend himself, and even that was extremely challenging. The trajectory of the attacks was elusive and almost broke his arm. Finally, Kirill stopped and decided to trust his older brother this time. Then, she hugged him and cried like a child. Kirill also informed him that the demon kin had appeared. About a month ago, its traces were detected in the southern part of the Gairuan territory, entities that gained immense power through pacts with demons. It could be said that demon kin could rival the most sorcerous mages. Wanted to join Irene, couldn't rest easy, but she was stopped by her master, Skinna. This girl right there was Skinna, and it was said that she was over 50 years old, but her appearance could still be so youthful, likely due to magic, and she seemed to be able to read his thoughts. Furthermore, revealing that Kirill really liked his older brother made the girl uncomfortable, so she used that as a reason to deal with Kirill. "I'm sorry, the first impression might not be very good, huh? I have to be firmer than Kirill to become her master," Skinna said. Then, she took out a necklace for Irene, a crafted item that could detect demon energy in danger at a certain level. It could also neutralize most poisons. Kirill and Skinna had made it together over the past 5 years while waiting for him to wake up. Every day, Kirill had poured all her strength into making this necklace. It was the first time she had seen Kirill so eager since she took her as her disciple, so Irene he had to use it well. Irene could also feel that she was a wonderful master. A few days later, Irene was in the Gairuan territory, where they were temporarily stationed. This made the cunning nobles very curious, not expecting Irene to participate. This made the malicious nobles very curious, not expecting Irene to participate. They heard he got involved in a magical dimension, right? Also, the chief of the Phil Duke's southern clan is here, and he cannot forget the humiliation from back then, vowing to pay him back tenfold. Deputy leader of the Twilight Knights, Hill Burnett, has appeared here as well. He advised the noble families that it would be better not to participate in the punitive campaign. This shocked everyone. Hill Burnett will only wage this war with the forces he brought with him. Duke Phil wants to give his opinion but is powerless against the strength of the deputy leader. Demons are entirely different from monsters. My army and I are armed with unyielding belief and absolute loyalty to our country. Compared to the safety of the continent and the peace of the nation, we are not interested in fighting alongside those who prioritize honor above all else. The words of Hill Burnett carry a terrifying force that renders all unable to resist. Ryan, the son of Duke Phil, bravely stepped in front of Hill Burnett to apologize for their earlier neglect and pleaded for a chance to atone by exterminating the monsters. It turned out that what just occurred was a test by Hill Burnett. He hoped that everyone could elevate their spirits for the following day. That night, a man came to meet the deputy leader. He was a wandering knight from the kingdom of Gerbra. Through his words, it was revealed that Ilya had become the most powerful famed knight of the Moonlight Knights in the kingdom of Adon. One of my students, comparable to Lindsay from the kingdom of Hale, had displayed a talent equal to Ilya during the final assessment. The deputy leader was astounded, for this was the first time he had heard of this. That student, named Irene, was also participating in this expedition. Recently, the gap between the Gairuan and Perreira clans had grown too large, making it difficult to bridge through sheer force. However, if they led in this conquest, they could reclaim their position. For that to happen, Phil's son Ryan had to attract the deputy leader's attention. However, he ignored Ryan and went straight to Irene because of the conversation the previous night. All the young ones, except you, are using their rest time to practice swordsmanship, but you seem to be resting comfortably. Is there another reason? Irene answered cautiously, I apologize for presenting an image of not putting in effort, but for me, practicing swordsmanship is unnecessary now. Because what others are doing is not effort. This perplexed the deputy leader. I joined this brutal war to destroy the demons. And always actively participate in the process to enhance the honor of the clan. Effort is only achieved when the heart and actions unite as one. Practicing swordsmanship in an unsatisfied mental state cannot be considered an effort. The deputy knight leader immediately ordered the troops to advance, and Irene was especially kept by his side. This infuriated Phil and his son. Their malicious faces wanted to harm Irene to take that position. Meanwhile, Irene was explaining a few things to the deputy leader. First, I've never killed anyone before. So I need to mentally prepare to cope with the shock and chaos that will ensue during my first kill. Second, I believe nothing is more dangerous than the unexpected actions of an inexperienced soldier. We need to calm down and be careful not to cause trouble for the conquering army under the leadership of the captain. Third, the power emanating from the demons and their subordinates is demonic energy. We must raise our vigilance to detect and report the presence of the enemy. The deputy leader was pleased with Irene's answer. Suddenly, Irene sensed the presence of a demon. A large demon had ambushed them from behind. The deputy leader immediately ordered everyone to prepare for battle. He arranged people in suitable positions to fight the smaller monsters, while he would personally deal with the demon. Suddenly, Irene, swift as lightning, slashed the giant demon in two, shocking everyone. When did he become so powerful? But the demon wasn't defeated by that strike. Its body regenerated and attacked him. With a crash, a surge of power repelled a significant portion, yet it could not touch him. Irene didn't flee but confronted it head-on. A sword technique was unleashed that blew the demon away, leaving everyone stunned. They didn't know whether to call Irene a monster or a human anymore. His power was as if he had cheats enabled. The battle wasn't over. They needed to deal with the smaller monsters there. Quickly this task was accomplished, everyone was safe, and no supplies were damaged. Their army continued on the march. At the same time, Irene didn't understand himself, why he had acted the way he did upon seeing the monsters. He couldn't contain his rage. It was the first time he felt such intense emotion. It was as if he wasn't himself in that moment. Captain Hill approached him, his face full of authority. Irene immediately bowed his head to apologize for acting on his own without following orders. I couldn't control my emotions and acted impulsively, he admitted. However, Captain Hill praised him. You did very well. You killed that giant monster, and we suffered no significant losses. Your first performance was impressive. I want to continue witnessing your displays of power in the future, Irene. His father, also very proud, embraced him tightly. This made Ryan go insane. He was devising a dirty plan to sabotage them. Irene also took out his glass ring, explaining to the captain that it could detect demonic energy faster than the priest's holy artifacts. Suddenly, it emitted a strange glow, an enemy presence. They were approaching from the left. Captain Hill immediately ordered everyone to prepare for battle and form ranks to the left. A horde of monsters from the forest rushed to attack them, but with Irene's help, they were quickly and easily defeated. The deputy leader had complete trust in Irene's amulet. This further irritated Duke Phil and his son, as it seemed they would forever be incomparable to Irene's clan. At dinner, Irene's necklace suddenly glowed black. Remembering his sister's warning, he was certain the food was poisoned. Moreover, the necklace also had the function of detoxifying, so he only needed to wait for it to return to its normal color to eat safely. Irene realized someone was trying to harm him and couldn't help but suspect the foolish clan of Duke Phil and their accomplices. He decided to handle this quietly, using his necklace to absorb the toxins. Under his bowl, he found a note warning of the poison in his food. Irene was curious about who the person was. Meanwhile, Jack was silently observing from a distance. He was the one who had poisoned Irene. After dinner, the deputy leader called Irene for a sparring match to stretch their muscles. He needed to gauge Irene's strength for the upcoming expedition. The atmosphere between the two intensified frighteningly, their bodies seeming to enlarge. Even Captain Hill wasn't sure he could block Irene's sword. A soldier suddenly fell, distracted by their duel, so the captain halted the fight. He declared that Irene could act independently and didn't need to wait for his orders. Such capability was indeed beneficial for autonomous actions. That night, Irene began to ponder. Handling the giant monster and facing the captain felt slightly different yet similar. A burning sensation dominated his entire body. It was as if someone else had taken control of his body, like the first time he had that dream. It's that person, Irene thought. He believed he had escaped, but why had it appeared again? The only difference was that the entity was angry. The dream had changed, that person had never shown emotions before, so why was it angry now? Irene couldn't understand. Ryan, waking up, interrogated Jack about poisoning Irene the previous day, but Irene appeared normal. This puzzled Ryan, who then ordered Jack to double the dose of poison. At that day's meal, Irene's necklace glowed black again, warning of the poison, yet the paper note continued to alert him. As their troop was moving, Irene suddenly sensed demonic energy to the left. He rushed forward, slashing through the demons. With the collaboration of the captain, they were quickly defeated. The soldiers admired Irene, who realized his senses were becoming sharper. He could detect demonic energy even before the stone. Perhaps it was due to the influence of that entity. After several unsuccessful poisoning attempts, Ryan was infuriated. Jack informed Ryan that the necklace could detoxify, so they would never succeed. Having no other choice, Ryan resolved to capture a demon himself to earn merits. Their army quickly arrived at the cave that served as the demon's base. As the soldiers stepped inside, they heard the sound of a violin, and the scenery before them began to change, as if they were in a palace. Irene felt something was off, everyone was acting strangely. Could they be trapped in an illusion? He immediately warned everyone. The captain roared to help everyone regain their clarity. The final demon appeared, its appearance closely resembling a human, signifying it was no ordinary being. Except for its red eyes, no other features belonged to the human form. It had borrowed the power of demons yet retained its self-identity. It was the first time the captain had encountered such an advanced demon. Ryan, who had been hoping to defeat it to earn merit, realized he was powerless against it. The demon began to enchant everyone with music, but fortunately, the captain's warning pulled them back to reality. Ryan, disregarding orders, charged at the demon but was restrained by its hair, which instantly formed into a hand to attack him. Jack intervened in time to block the attack. In saving him, Jack was captured by the demon, but it had no intention of killing him. Instead, it proposed a negotiation. The demon began to enchant everyone with music, but fortunately, the captain's warning pulled them back to reality. Ryan, disregarding orders, charged at the demon but was restrained by its hair, which instantly formed into a hand to attack him. Jack intervened in time to block the attack. In saving him, Jack was captured by the demon, but it had no intention of killing him. Instead, it proposed a negotiation. At this moment, Duke Phil began to consider discarding Jack like trash for the greater good. Jack had risked his life to save young Ryan only to now be discarded like garbage. The demon immediately changed its conditions, quickly using its hair to seize Ryan. The soldiers began to advance to kill the demon, but old Phil blocked them. He wanted to protect his son and was ready to confront them. He even called upon his accomplices to oppose the soldiers. Captain Hill certainly couldn't let this pass. As the general of the Twilight Knights, I order you, I will absolutely not spare any clan or person who obstructs me from exterminating the demon, he declared. This development indeed followed the demon's plan. At this moment, it noticed a handsome young man focused on something. Irene swiftly slashed through the air, cutting the demon in half. Although it could regenerate, the wound inflicted by Irene wasn't so easily healed. The demon used its hostage as a shield to buy time for recovery, but to no avail. Unbeknownst to it, one of its arms had been severed. Next, Irene charged directly at the demon, but its hair blocked him. The demon continued to use its hair to wrap its body as a shield against Irene's sword, but it was ineffective. Irene kept attacking the demon like a fish on a chopping board. The demon, unable to recover anymore, had been split in two but was still frantically trying to escape. The captain's speed couldn't keep up, but Irene's sword was much faster. With one swift stroke, the demon was slain, and they had successfully exterminated the demon this time. Everyone joyously chanted Irene's name. They returned to Gyruan territory, the temporary base of the Twilight Knights, in disbelief. The brutal war had ended without any injuries. They were up against a formidable opponent who even used illusionary tactics, and their victory was all thanks to Irene. At that time, Duke Phil was frantically justifying his opposition to the extermination of the demon, claiming that he was manipulated by the demon. Captain Hill had no evidence to accuse the old man. Irene, taking a rest, was approached by Jack, who came to express his gratitude for saving his life. When I was taken hostage, no one cared about my life. Had it not been for you, young master, I surely would have died, he admitted. Jack also confessed that he poisoned Irene's food, although it was under the Duke's orders. Irene chose not to make a fuss about Jack's actions, deciding to deal with it later. At that moment, Ruru appeared. The black cat had no face to meet Irene, but it still showed up. If I raised you better, your other abilities would have manifested. You haven't been away from your family for 5 years, and Kirill wouldn't be so sad. It's all my fault, Ruru expressed regret. As Irene reached out to touch the cat, Ruru jumped back and yelled, warning him not to touch it lest he becomes unlucky. Superstition is also a kind of power. If many people believe in meaningless stories, they become real. Even an existence without any power can become real if many believe in it. Magic is born from the will of many and can manipulate the law of the world, Ruru said. The cat planned to run away, fearing that staying with Irene would bring him misfortune. However, Irene caught Ruru, declaring that from now on, the black cat would symbolize his good luck. Compared to the collective faith of others, I am more trustworthy. You're a black cat that doesn't bring bad luck but fortune. A black cat with a white belly, everyone laughed. Irene recounted to Ruru his 5 years of training in that world. Ruru had always been by his side since he escaped that magical realm. The white cat was also a disguise of Ruru, who had sent the paper of the battlefield. Ruru also noticed that facing the demon, Irene felt strangely, seemingly related to the man in his dreams who hated demons and devils vehemently. If it was someone from about 150 years ago, what's more crucial is because of that guy's will, your heart is being influenced, Ruru said. Meanwhile, Captain Hill was furious because other families were affected by Duke Gyruan's declaration. How could the unauthorized action against his royal knights be covered up like this? Captain Hill would not let this pass so easily. The next day, Captain Hill went to see Duke Phil. I heard a very shameful incident occurred during the expedition. Rumor has it that the Gyruan family poisoned the food of young Master Perreira, leaving Duke Phil frozen, denying any wrongdoing and claiming there was no evidence to prove it. Jack was called in by Captain Hill, and he confessed to the crime because he was discarded like trash by the old man. Captain Hill wanted him to confess. If he didn't want everything he built to crumble, he should do so. Next, he wanted to visit Irene's family to invite him to join the Twilight Knights, but Irene had long run to the Swordsmanship Academy. He was in the city of the academy where many people could use magic. The reason why this city could develop into a vast capital was due to the main building of Chrono Swordsmanship Academy being located here. Irene entered a shop, and the guys there stared at him intently. One of them spoke up, asking if Irene was also a guest of Chrono Swordsmanship Academy. When he affirmed, the group burst into mocking laughter, accusing him of bragging shamelessly. At this point, the shop owner Perreira called Irene over and informed him that they were also guests of the Swordsmanship Academy. Chrono Swordsmanship Academy was a place where many realized their dreams because of its reputation. Sword-bearing guests often visited, and the academy often refused admission due to the overwhelming number of applicants. People who refused to leave the main gate until someone attended to them started to appear. Some even formed groups to ridicule the academy, claiming that Chrono's people were all cowards. As a result, a guest reception system was created. Every 2 weeks, on the day arranged by Chrono, the academy would accept anyone wanting to compete in swordsmanship. That's why they all wanted to label themselves as mercenaries to meet the criteria to take the challenge. He took Irene down to the basement for a test, where Irene would have to strike with all his might to complete it. The two old men beside them were betting that Irene would score at least 500 points. They were instantly shocked when Irene's sword could magically appear in midair. With a resonating clash, instead of breaking, it absorbed the entire impact. Irene's score of over 10,000 points left them in awe. Following this, he was given the highest-ranking silver card for mercenaries. They were accommodated in a spacious room befitting their status. The next day, Irene participated in a tournament event for welcoming guests. He immediately recognized a peer from his generation who was also present. The young man seemed to have become much stronger than before. He confidently introduced himself as Lance Patterson, an official student of Batch 27 and would be competing against everyone. This was a complete reversal from previous years because normally, only graduates would compete. The Swordsmanship Academy also hoped that the students could accumulate experience by fighting outsiders. Of course, I am still a student, so I may not be on par with everyone else. If you defeat me, the seniors will be the ones to fight against all of you, Lance claimed. One big guy rushed onto the stage but was easily defeated by the overwhelming strength of Lance. Everyone realized that they were not on the same level. Like that, many were defeated and it seemed like no one else dared to compete. At this point, Lance had recognized a familiar face in the audience. He immediately walked over to chat with Irene, having not seen each other in 5 years. He also mentioned how unfortunate it was that Irene hadn't arrived a bit earlier. He could have met Judith and Blurg. A few days earlier, Blurg had gone to train with Judith. Lance wanted to spar with Irene, leading to a duel between the two. Irene summoned his sword in mid-air, causing a stir among the audience. This was certainly magic. Lance took the duel seriously, launching numerous attacks, all of which were parried by Irene. Moreover, Lance noticed something unusual. Irene was using Blurga's sword techniques against him. Recognizing Irene's unique sword stance, Lance lunged forward. If Irene's sword strike was unleashed, Lance was sure he wouldn't be able to defend against it. The power of this move had been terrifying during their final evaluation 5 years earlier. At that moment, Irene began his counterattack, employing Judith's sword techniques and leaving Lance stunned. Lance had never lost to anyone except those two. Frenzied, he attacked Irene with immense pressure. He had always strived to be as strong as them, but facing this monster, he still couldn't win. The cat also sensed the presence of the old swordsman. The headmaster was delighted to see Irene again. He mistook the cat as Irene's new magical pet, forgetting it was supposed to be his master. The headmaster removed his coat, wanting to spar with Irene. Known as the continent's strongest swordsman, he was now Irene's opponent. Irene lunged at full speed, but his attacks were easily parried. The headmaster's skills were far superior, and it seemed an easy victory was at hand. However, his attack was blocked by Irene, leaving him surprised. Irene could use Blurga's sword art but was still riddled with flaws and quickly countered by the headmaster. Irene's myriad of techniques were not smoothly combined, a crucial element in a real duel. Irene unleashed Ilya's powerful sword art, but the headmaster easily neutralized it. "Aren't you holding something back?" the headmaster questioned, with Irene standing motionless. Suddenly, he unleashed a terrifying sword strike, splitting the dueling arena in half. Everyone present was stunned. What kind of power was this? The headmaster had to use his sword's energy to block the attack. He realized that Irene had found his own sword, but his heart was unstable. "You probably want to ask yourself about that," he said, beckoning Irene to follow him. In the headmaster's room, the cat introduced itself not as a pet, but as Irene's magical tutor. The person beside the headmaster was the current deputy headmaster, Kyra. After hearing the entire story about the swordsman in Irene's dream, the headmaster's only advice was that Irene could make his sword even stronger. He might even wield a completely different sword than he currently does and should embark on a journey to discover his answers in a broader world. Irene decided to do just that, no more running away. Thus, his next journey began. End of part 1. Hit like to get part 2 soon.